She thought she was buying a rundown scrapyard just outside the city limits, the kind of place no one wanted. But when Marley Reyes pried open a rusted hatch buried under a cracked concrete slab, she found more than junk. Beneath her boots was a sealed Cold War-era military bunker, and parked inside were forgotten machines of war tanks, transports, and a secret that had been locked away for decades. What began as a gamble on cheap land would uncover a mystery wrapped in steel, silence, and legacy. Before we dive in, let us know where in the world you're watching from, and if stories like this spark something in you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more jaw-dropping than this one. The wind kicked up dust across the gravel lot as Marley Reyes stepped out of her truck, hands on her hips, eyes squinting against the morning glare. The property stretched wider than she'd expected. 5 acres of cracked concrete, collapsed fencing, and rusted-out machinery half swallowed by weeds. A chain-link gate hung lopsided, the padlock so corroded it fell apart when she touched it. This was it, the so-called scrapyard with potential she'd spent the last of her savings on. No utilities, no office, no working structures, just a deed, a dream, and the kind of silence that made you second-guess everything. She'd driven past this place for years. Locals called it cursed. Said the previous owner vanished sometime in the 90s. Government-owned before that, apparently. Some whispered about radiation. Others just laughed and said it was an old dump for military scrap no one cared about. But Marley didn't believe in curses. She believed in potential. That's what her dad used to say when he was still around. If it's built with bolts, it can be brought back to life. She'd watched him revive wrecked Harleys, abandoned engines, even a tractor once left in a swamp. He passed before she could learn everything, but he left her with enough grit to take chances. And this land, this forgotten patch of earth, was her biggest chance yet. She set to work the same day. No grand opening, no fancy tools, just gloves, a crowbar, and stubbornness. First came the cleanup. Marley dragged warped sheet metal into piles, pulled tires from ditches, and shoveled out a collapsed trailer filled with broken generators. Days passed. Her hands blistered, her back ached. But with every cleared corner, she could almost see the outline of what this place could be. A custom fabrication shop, maybe. A restoration yard. A home for projects no one else believed in. Then, one afternoon, she found it. It was under a layer of gravel and rebar near the back of the lot, where the weeds grew tallest and the dirt turned to hard-packed clay. Marley had been moving an old forklift frame when her boot struck something solid. Not stone, not metal junk. Something round. She dropped to her knees, brushing away the dust. It was a hatch. Circular, iron, with faded yellow paint along the rim and a warning in stenciled red. Restricted access, U.S. Property. Her heart kicked hard. She hadn't expected this. No mention of it in the deed. No structure on the maps. But there it was, a sealed door embedded in the ground like something out of a war film, bolted shut, with a rusted wheel lock in the center. No keypad, no handle, just steel and silence. Marley stood slowly, breathing heavy, gloves streaked with dirt. For the first time since buying the lot, she felt something shift in her gut. This wasn't just junk. This wasn't just land. This was something someone had buried, and she was going to find out why. The next morning, Marley returned to the hatch before the sun had even cleared the horizon. She hadn't slept much. Her mind kept replaying that moment, the thud of her boot, the red stenciled letters, the way the metal seemed too solid to belong to anything ordinary. She brought a flashlight, a breaker bar, and a thermos of bitter gas station coffee. There was no one around for miles. Just the echo of wind through the skeletal fencing and the quiet clink of her tools as she set them down. Up close, the hatch looked even more serious. It wasn't some flimsy cellar door or rusted septic tank cover. The seams were flush, precision cut, bolted in 6 places. The wheel lock in the center fused with decades of corrosion. Marley knelt beside it, running her gloved fingers over the faded lettering. There were no serial numbers, no contractor stamps, no military insignia, just that one warning. Restricted access. She spent the morning trying to break it open. First came the wire brush, grinding away rust. Then WD-40, soaking every bolt, every groove. The wheel lock groaned under pressure but wouldn't move, not even a centimeter. Marley gritted her teeth. She wasn't used to losing battles with metal. After all, she'd rebuilt transmissions more frozen than this. But this wasn't just any machine. This was a door someone wanted to stay shut. A door no one had touched in decades. And something about that made her even more determined. By noon, she had her first win. One of the bolts cracked loose. She whooped so loud a flock of crows burst from a power line nearby. The sound echoed across the yard like a victory bell. By the time the sun started to dip, she had all 6 bolts pulled and the wheel lock freed, at least enough to turn with a metal pipe for leverage. Marley planted her boots, braced her arms, and twisted. The wheel shrieked in protest, metal against metal. Then, a pop, a shudder, a breath of stale air hissed out from the seam. The hatch creaked open 3 inches. She stepped back, heart pounding. Dust billowed up in a slow, musty cloud. The smell of earth, oil, and something old like a workshop sealed in time. She leaned over the opening and aimed her flashlight down. Stairs, metal, rusted but intact, leading into blackness. The beam of her light caught something glinting far below. A railing? Pipes? She couldn't tell. But it was deep, at least 20 feet down. Maybe more. She stared into the dark for a long time. This wasn't what she bought the land for. She was supposed to build a life here, not stumble into Cold War leftovers. And yet, it felt like fate. Like something had waited for her. Not someone. Something. Marley set the flashlight on the lip of the hatch, grabbed her gloves, and placed one boot on the first step. The metal groaned softly beneath her weight. She whispered to no one. Okay, let's see what they left behind. Then, she disappeared into the dark. The air grew colder. With each step, Marley descended. She counted them as she went 1, 2, 20, 34, each metal stair groaning beneath her boots, some flaking with rust, others still solid beneath years of dust. Her flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the darkness, catching glimpses of pipework along the walls. Conduit cables bolted neatly into place, and warning labels faded almost to nothing. This wasn't a storm shelter. It wasn't even a basement. This was something built for permanence. Reinforced concrete, steel supports, welded seams designed to outlast time itself. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a long hallway. The ceiling was low, claustrophobic, lined with flickering bulbs and protective cages, only one of which still glowed a dull amber. Marley stepped forward slowly, her breath visible in the cold. A heavy silence hung in the air, the kind that made you feel like you were being watched, even when you weren't. The flashlight beam caught a sign on the wall. She leaned in close, brushing away grime. Sublevel 1. Armory access divided by vehicle storage. Clearance required. Her breath hitched. She'd expected maybe an old water pump station, or at most, a decommissioned fallout shelter. But this was far more than that. Vehicle storage? What kind of bunker needed its own garage? She moved forward, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the corridor. The walls were lined with closed doors, some labeled Mechanical Bay, others simply numbered. Most were sealed tight, but one halfway down the hall stood slightly ajar. The edge of its steel frame warped like it had been forced open decades ago. Marley paused, pressed her hand against the door, and pushed gently. It swung open with a low groan, revealing a room the size of a warehouse, concrete floor, curved ceiling, overhead lights long since dead. But her flashlight swept across the space and landed on something massive. A vehicle, tank-like in shape. Angular. Covered in dust so thick it looked gray instead of green. A U.S. Army star was barely visible on its side. The tires, if they could be called, that were solid rubber, dry-rotted and cracked. A heavy turret sat motionless on top, pointed toward the far wall. She stepped closer, heart pounding. It wasn't just one. Behind it, in neat rows stretching into shadow, were more armored personnel carriers, scout vehicles, maybe even a deuce-and-a-half transport near the back. Some had open hatches. Others looked like they hadn't been touched since the 1,980 seconds. Her light caught the corner of a clipboard still hanging from a side mirror, its pages brittle but intact. It was real, all of it. She wasn't just standing in history. She was standing in something someone had tried very hard to forget. Marley took a shaky breath and whispered, "What the hell is this place?" And somewhere in the quiet, the distant thump of settling metal echoed, or maybe it wasn't the bunker settling at all. Maybe something had just moved. Marley stood frozen, her flashlight beam jittering slightly in her grip. That sound, that subtle thump reverberating through the steel beneath her boots, it had come from deeper in the bunker. She waited, straining her ears. But all she heard was the echo of her own breath, loud and uneven in the cold, stale air. It could have been metal shifting, a pipe cooling, or old air pressure releasing after years of stillness. But it felt like more. Like she wasn't alone down here. Not really. She forced herself forward, weaving between the rows of vehicles. Some were labeled with unit numbers. Others had names painted in peeling white letters: Iron Stag, Daisy Chain. Tombstone, two ghost names from a time when these machines still roared to life and rolled into war zones. Marley trailed her fingers along one of them. The metal was cold, solid, and real. Every bolt told a story. Every weld line had been laid by someone with purpose. These weren't just relics. They were survivors of a forgotten history. At the far end of the room, she found a small door marked Operations Bay. A red light still glowed faintly above it. A battery backup, maybe. Marley pushed the door open and stepped into what looked like a command center. Dust-covered monitors lined the walls, their screens black and cracked. An old rotary phone sat on a desk next to a water-stained clipboard. Paper maps were pinned to corkboards. Europe, the Middle East, Korea, all marked with circles and arrows. One map, closest to the door, showed a detailed grid of the local county, with a small black X over the exact plot of land Marley had just bought. Her stomach dropped. This place hadn't just been military. It had been active, monitored, hidden in plain sight. Her property wasn't some forgotten dump. It was a buried nerve center. She stepped behind the desk and opened a drawer. Inside were faded documents, vehicle logs, maintenance reports, even ration lists. Most were dated between 1981 and 1989. But the last one was stamped March 14th, 1991. A handwritten note across the top read, "Final lockdown initiated. No retrieval authorized. Await further orders." But there were no further orders. At least, none that ever came. She sat slowly in the chair behind the desk, the weight of it all settling into her bones. The bunker hadn't been decommissioned. It had been abandoned. Deliberately. Forgotten. And now, all of it, the tanks, the weapons, the records, it was under her name. Her land, her responsibility. The silence around her felt heavier now, less like peace and more like pressure. Like the walls were waiting for her to decide what came next. A soft hum caught her ear, electrical, distant, alive. Marley stood, turned back toward the hallway and saw it. A faint orange glow pulsing from behind one of the sealed doors she'd passed earlier. Her flashlight flickered. Something down here was still on, still watching, still waiting. The orange glow grew brighter as Marley approached, leaking through the narrow seam beneath the door like the last breath of a sunset. Her boots were silent on the concrete, her flashlight off now, replaced by that eerie pulse not flickering like a dying bulb, but steady, rhythmic, like something alive. The door itself was labeled simply, Logistics and Records. Not locked, just sealed with time. She hesitated, fingers on the latch, unsure what she was more afraid of, what she might find, or what she might understand. She pulled. It opened with a groan that echoed down the corridor like a warning. Inside was a narrow room with floor-to-ceiling shelves, every one of them stuffed with file boxes, grease-smeared binders, and metal drawers. It looked like a forgotten library for machines and missions. The glow came from a small battery-powered emergency lamp hanging crooked above a desk in the corner, still running after God knew how many years. Marley stepped inside and let the door ease shut behind her. On the desk were open files, reports with redacted lines, maintenance schedules, unit deployment records. She picked one up, the paper brittle in her gloves. Operation Frostback Deployment Roster. Mobile Vehicle Bay, 14B. Below were names. Names of soldiers, engineers, mechanics. Handwritten notations marked some of them as re-signed. Others simply said MIA. She flipped through more folders. One labeled Vehicle Catalog Classified Inventory detailed every vehicle in the storage bay. Each had a status column, and next to more than a dozen of them, someone had written Asset Lost in smeared ink. But the vehicles were still here, parked, untouched, unused. She didn't understand. Then she found the photos. Black and white images stapled to the corners of reports, men posing beside armored trucks, smiling like kids beside their first cars. One showed a young mechanic crouched beside a scout vehicle, grease on his cheek, holding up a thumbs up to the camera. On the back, someone had written, Danny. Last seen the 4th of March, 2091, bunker lockdown. Her fingers tightened around the photo. These weren't just government machines. They were stories. Lives. Men who had worked and lived down here, whose names were buried in paperwork, never meant to be read again, and then abandoned. One drawer stuck when she tried to open it. She jiggled it loose, metal screeching, and inside found a heavy binder marked with a strange insignia. Not military, not local law enforcement. Some kind of private division? She flipped it open and saw pages of parts requisitions. Generators, fuel cells, radio components, even advanced computing hardware well beyond early 90s tech. Marley blinked. This wasn't normal military surplus. Someone had been building something else down here. Something bigger. Something off the books. At the very bottom of the drawer, she found a key. No tag. Just a small brass key wrapped in a folded note that read, For the vault beneath Bay 6. Authorized personnel only. Her eyes widened. There had been no Bay 6 signposted in the vehicle hangar, which meant it was hidden, and someone years ago had left her a way in. It took Marley nearly an hour to find the entrance to Bay 6. She retraced her steps into the main vehicle chamber, flashlight sweeping across every wall and corner. The concrete was seamless, the walls unmarked, until she noticed a slightly different texture in the far right corner behind a stack of crates, long collapsed and covered in tarp. She pulled them away one by one, revealing what looked like a utility panel set into the wall. No label, no handle, just a narrow keyhole, corroded but intact. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the brass key from her pocket. It fit. A soft click echoed like a breath held too long, and with a gentle push, the wall gave way. A panel slid open to reveal a narrow staircase leading even deeper underground, colder, darker, untouched. The smell changed here. It wasn't just dust and rust anymore. It was earth and oil, and something else beneath it all. Secrecy. At the bottom was a steel vault door. On it, stenciled in clean white, Bay 6. Restricted, commanding officer, access only. A keypad blinked dead beside it, long since drained of power. But Marley spotted a manual release wheel to the side, locked with a bolt she could cut. She hesitated for only a moment, before pulling out her angle grinder. Sparks lit the dark, as steel screamed. The sound, too loud, too alive, in such a buried place. But when the lock gave way, and the wheel turned, the door released with a hiss of pressurized air, like the bunker was exhaling a secret it had held for far too long. Inside, the room was small, about the size of her old bedroom. Shelves lined the walls, filled with carefully preserved documents, blueprints, sealed boxes, and a single steel desk in the center. Spotless, organized, and eerily well kept compared to the rest of the facility. It was like someone had expected to return. On the desk was a journal, leather-bound, heavy, tied with twine. She untied it slowly, as if waking a ghost. The first page read, "Property of Colonel Everett Maddox, Commanding Officer, Site Echo 9. If you are reading this, I did not make it back." Marley swallowed hard and turned the page. The entry started in 1984. Dry at first, technical, notes about vehicle intake, training rotations, covert assignments, and equipment tests. But over time, the tone changed. The lines grew personal. Maddox wrote about the men under his command, the pressure from unnamed civilians in suits, and his growing discomfort with the purpose of the bunker. He suspected the project wasn't just military readiness, it was containment. One entry stopped her cold. The 12th of February 1990. 1. They've ordered final lockdown. No transport, no extraction, just silence. They told me to seal the facility and await further contact. But no one's answering anymore. Not even the Pentagon. The radio's been dead for 2 days. I've ordered all personnel to evacuate topside, but I'm staying. If someone finds this, tell Danny his father tried to do the right thing. Her breath caught. Danny. The same name from the photo in the logistics room. The boy in the picture, the mechanic with grease on his cheek, hadn't just been a soldier. He was the colonel's son. Marley closed the journal slowly, hands trembling, the weight of it heavier than the leather binding. It wasn't just a collection of entries, it was a goodbye, a confession, a record of a father who had stayed behind when everything else fell apart. She stood in the silence of Bay 6 for a long moment, letting the truth settle in her bones. This bunker wasn't abandoned, it was entombed, and now she was its only living witness. She returned to the vehicle bay with a sense of gravity she hadn't felt before. Each armored vehicle she passed no longer looked like scrap. They were relics not just of war, but of the people who had touched them, worked on them, trusted them to protect their lives. She walked until she reached the scout vehicle from earlier, the one with the name Daisy Chain barely visible beneath decades of grime. It was smaller than the others, more compact, with flat paneling and worn-down tires. Something about it felt personal. She climbed inside. The cabin was cramped but intact. Dials and switches coated in dust. A tattered logbook still clipped to the dash. She flipped it open. Most of the entries were routine fuel levels, battery checks, brake tests. But the last page was different. A single sentence scrawled in sharp, hurried handwriting. Did one last sweep. Still nothing. If you're reading this, we waited. The signature at the bottom stopped her cold. D. Maddox. Danny. Marley swallowed the lump in her throat and looked around the interior again. Tucked behind the passenger seat was a canvas satchel, faded and stiff with age. Inside, an old dog tag, a folded photo of Danny and Colonel Maddox standing beside Daisy Chain, and a cassette tape in a plastic case labeled in marker, "For Dad. Don't listen until I'm back." She held the tape like it might break. There was no player in the vehicle, but she knew she had an old boombox up in her trailer. Still, something about playing it felt too sacred, too soon. She slid the tape carefully back into the bag and placed the dog tag in her palm. Maddox, Daniel, A. O. Pose USMC. The letters blurred as her eyes welled. This wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a monument. And somehow, it had been entrusted to her. She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the scout vehicle. Not for restoration, for remembrance. She wiped every dial, cleared the windshield, scraped off layers of dust until the name across the hood could breathe again. Daisy Chain gleamed faintly beneath the grime, like a ghost whispering back into life. As the last light of day filtered through the open hatch above, Marley stepped back from the vehicle, arms streaked with dirt, heart full of something she couldn't name. This wasn't about million-dollar machines anymore. It was about one man's promise to his son, and the story buried in steel they never got to finish. Word traveled faster than Marley expected. She hadn't told anyone. Not officially, just a quiet post on an old mechanics forum looking for advice on Cold War-era diesel engines. She included a photo of daisy chain, newly cleaned but unrestored, and a cropped shot of the dash panel asking if anyone had ever seen a configuration like it. No context, no claims, just curiosity. But by morning, her inbox was flooded. Most were hobbyists. A few were skeptics. But one message stood out: short, direct, and impossible to ignore. "I know that vehicle. It belonged to Danny Maddox. I served with his father. Can we talk? Thomas H. Callahan, Sergeant retired." She stared at the message for a long time before responding. 3 days later, an old pickup truck rolled onto her property just after sunrise. The man who stepped out moved slowly, his posture stiff with age, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the yard like he was still on patrol. He wore a worn leather jacket, patches faded from time, and carried a folded envelope in one hand like it was a part of him. "You're the one who found it?" he asked. Marley nodded. "The whole facility. It was under the property. I didn't know what I was buying." He walked with her toward the open hatch. "None of us did. That's the way Maddox wanted it. Quiet, off-grid. Only a few of us even knew where it was." As they descended into the bunker, his breath caught. The hallway, the dust, the smell of time thick in the air. It hit him like a ghost. He didn't say much as they walked, only that it had been over 30 years since he'd last seen these walls. But when they stepped into the vehicle bay, and he saw Daisy Chain under the low light, he stopped in his tracks. "She's still here," he whispered. "God, she's still here." He walked toward the vehicle, slowly, reverently, like approaching a grave site. His fingers traced the name stenciled on the hood. "I thought they were gone. Danny, Everett, all of them. After the lockdown, none of us were allowed back. The program was buried, literally." "What was this place?" Marley asked quietly. Callahan exhaled. "Officially, a readiness depot. Unofficially, a last-chance fallback. Vehicles, rations, shortwave communications meant to survive a nuclear exchange if it ever came." Maddox took it seriously. Too seriously. He moved his own son down here to be part of it. Said if it all went to hell, he wanted someone he trusted beside him. Marley didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth was written across the Colonel's journal, in the files, in the silence. "I was supposed to rotate in the week after they sealed it," Callahan said. "Never got the order. Pentagon went dark, rumors flew, then it was scrubbed, like it never existed." He pulled the envelope from his jacket. Inside were old photos, him, Danny, the Colonel, laughing beside a grill at the surface entrance. "They were family," he said softly. "And you've brought them home again." After Callahan left, Marley couldn't sleep. She sat up in the trailer with the old cassette tape beside her, staring at it like it might whisper something if she waited long enough. The visit had shaken something loose. Not fear, not even grief. Something deeper. A realization that she wasn't just uncovering history, she was being pulled into it. The bunker, the vehicles, the files, they weren't just echoes. They were unfinished business. The next morning, she went back down. This time, she wasn't just wandering. She wanted answers. Callahan had mentioned fallback protocols, last resort deployments, something too big to be on any map. Marley remembered the parts inventory she'd found in the restricted binder experimental hardware, components that didn't belong in 1991. She returned to Bay 6, searching the floor for anything out of place. That's when she noticed the drain cover near the far wall, thicker than normal, and bolted. She pulled it free. Beneath it was a metal hatch. This one wasn't labeled. No paint, no warnings, just a handle and 4 bolts sealing it tight. Marley used the angle grinder again, sparks bouncing off the concrete like fireflies in the gloom. When the final bolt fell away, she hesitated just for a moment and then opened it. It revealed a ladder, another level, smaller, tighter, colder. She descended carefully, the air getting denser as she went. Her flashlight flickered, catching on something metallic at the bottom, a sealed crate. Then another, and another. Dozens of them, stacked neatly, wall to wall, row by row. Each one was stamped with a single black symbol, not a military insignia, but a series of numbers and letters. Damned 417. Do not open, authorized eyes only. Property of the Department of Defense. Special Order Black. She pried one open. Inside was a weapon, not like anything she'd seen, compact, matte black, modular. It looked like a prototype. Alongside it were documents, test reports, energy readouts, target schematics. She flipped through them with shaking fingers, each page revealing something darker than the last. Non-lethal crowd suppression units, autonomous targeting software, low-noise propulsion systems. Some of it was dated 1990. Some had no date at all. One folder, thicker than the rest, was marked. Project Nightfall terminated the 19th of March, 2091. She opened it. It wasn't just research. It was a letter, not official. Handwritten. To Colonel Maddox. Everett, they're shutting us down. All assets are to be locked and sealed under your authority. You are to erase all digital records and destroy the hard drives. This isn't just about hardware anymore. Too many questions. Too many eyes. Do not reach out again. Final directive. Bury it. L. Marley sat down on the cold concrete, the words swimming in front of her. This bunker hadn't just been forgotten. It had been intentionally erased. She looked around at the crates, millions in tech, hidden under decades of dirt and silence. This wasn't a scrapyard. It was a grave. And she was standing in the middle of what no one had ever meant to uncover. Marley stood alone beneath the earth, surrounded by sealed crates, ghost hardware, and secrets that had outlived their purpose. The flashlight beam danced across stenciled warnings and military jargon, but her mind was far from tactics and tech. She kept thinking about Danny, about the colonel, about a father who stayed behind to protect something, and a son who had trusted him to do the right thing and never made it out. She climbed back to the upper bay and sat in the driver's seat of Daisy Chain one more time. The seat creaked beneath her, the dust brushing off her shoulders like a memory. She pulled the cassette from her jacket pocket and turned it over in her hand. For Dad. Don't listen until I'm back. She swallowed hard. It took her nearly an hour to rig the power converter to the old boombox. When the tape finally began to play, the sound was warped, but clear enough. Hey Dad, if you're hearing this, then I guess I didn't make it out. That's okay. You always told me we don't get to choose the moment, just how we meet it. I was proud to serve with you. Proud to build something that might actually keep people safe. If this place ever gets found, I hope it's by someone who understands what it meant. There was a pause. Then laughter, soft, tired. You used to tell me, history is written in grease, not ink. You were right. These vehicles, they weren't just machines. They were homes, partners, sometimes even family. I left everything the way we planned. If someone's out there who can finish what we started, give them the key. Give them the story. The tape clicked to a stop. Marley didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, she sat in silence, the words settling into her, like the last bolt on a long rebuild. She looked around the bay. The dust. The tools. The machines that had waited so long for someone to remember them. And then she did something she hadn't done since she bought the yard. She turned on the lights. Not all of them worked, some flickered, others stayed dead. But the few that came alive bathed the bunker in a warm, golden glow. A heartbeat. A beginning. Over the next few weeks she got to work. Quietly, carefully. Not to sell, not to expose, to restore, one vehicle at a time. Daisy Chain got fresh tires, a fuel flush, and a promise. To roll again, not for war, but for legacy. Marley reached out to museums, veteran organizations, preservationists. Not with headlines, just letters. The right ones responded. One by one, visitors came. Old men in faded uniforms. Sons of soldiers who were never listed. Engineers who recognized parts they thought were lost forever. No press, no social media storm, just quiet reverence. Respect. And through it all, Marley kept going. She didn't chase fame. She chased meaning. What started as a broken scrapyard had become a sanctuary for memory. The day she installed a brass plaque at the bunker entrance, she worked alone. She mounted it to the concrete above the hatch, wiped it clean, and stepped back to read. Echo 9, Bunker. Restored not for power, but for remembrance. Let the silence speak. Then, with calloused hands and a heart forever changed, Marley closed the hatch, locked it gently, and turned toward the rising sun, not with weight on her shoulders, but with purpose in her stride. Because what she'd found beneath the dirt wasn't just steel, it was sacrifice. And that was something worth preserving. The end.